All right, let's get this webinar started. Let me pull up my notes here. All right, first of all, welcome. We are doing a webinar here today on overcoming smartphone dependency. So first of all, I'd like to start out with an interesting little anecdote that was given on an article that I read. It was called, the name of the article was "Social Media is the New Smoking and You Are Addicted." And that anecdote goes as follows. Her heart raced so fast that she was unsure she was going to have a heart attack. She paced her speed up. She was anxious to get home. One could even see the sweat dripping down her face. In an attempt to take a shortcut, she jaywalked across a wide street, zigzagging her way through it. She almost got hit by a truck. She didn't care. She is not concerned. She's just a few meters from her place. She has only one goal in mind. She needs it's so bad. She's losing her breath briskly. She would never admit it, but she is hooked. She can't live without it. Almost there, she opened the doorway nervously, walked into the living room, frenetically searches for it. She found it. She heaved a sigh of relief as she turns it on. She has successfully plugged her phone in. She's back on Instagram, scrolling and double tapping perfect fantasies. She exists now. She's online again. Lisa won't admit it, but she is addicted to social media. So first of all, I'd like to share with you, fortunately, this is the reality of a lot of people living out there, and certainly certain aspects of the story I've experienced as well. And I'll share with you a couple anecdotes in my life. There's one particular anecdote. This is before actually smartphones even existed. And I was at a Sprint store. And this is the time when you had to go to the Sprint store to transfer your contacts from your old phone to your new phone. And they were a little busy, so they said the whole process would take about 10 to 15 minutes. And in that 10 to 15 minutes, I found myself reaching for my pocket for my cell phone probably a good maybe 5, 6 times. Every time I had that little panic, oh my gosh, where's my cell phone? And then I came to the realization that, oh, well, my cell phone is with the employee because they're transferring the contacts for me. And I noticed, every time I'm out to dinner with my wife and she might take a couple minutes to go use the restroom, I reach for my phone. If I'm at a red light, that few moments that I have, I would reach for my phone. If I'm in the lobby waiting to get like a haircut or something, the first thing I would do is reach for my phone. And perhaps Kevin Roos put it best in his article, "Do Not Disturb, How I Ditched My Phone and Unbroke My Brain." He said, "Mostly, I became aware of how profoundly uncomfortable I am with stillness. For years, I've used my phone every time I've had a spare moment in an elevator or a boring meeting. I listen to podcasts and write emails on the subway. I watch YouTube videos while folding laundry. I even use an app to pretend to meditate." So with that introduction, we'll get into the outline of today's presentation. So first, we'll talk about the science and what the data says about cell phone use. And we'll also talk about how smartphones are designed to be addictive. And third, we'll talk about the solution. And with time at the end, we'll talk about, we'll have a question and answer at the end. Speaking of which, if you have a question, please submit that question in the chat box and I'll answer that at the end. So let's talk about the science. So Deloitte did a survey in 2018. It's called the Global Mobile Consumer Survey. So what they found is that consumers check their phone on average about 52 times a day. Now, for me, that kind of seemed a little low, and it didn't match up with my statistics of picking up my phone about 150 times a day. So what it turns out is that the younger the user, the more frequently they check their phone. And the millennial generation who checks their phone most often looks at their phone about 150 times a day. Now, what's also notable from that survey was that 39% of US consumers think that they use their smartphones too much. And 60% of 18 to 34-year-olds admit to smartphone overuse. It's the highest level of any age group. Moreover, 63% of US consumers report that they're actually trying to limit their smartphone use. Interestingly, only 32% are succeeding at cutting back. And we're going to talk a lot about that today in today's presentation. So let's go into more statistics here. So this is according to a company called Flurry Analytics. They said that the average consumer now spends 5 hours per day, which is about a 20% increase compared to usage in 2015. And Fleury also says that US users are spending more than half their time, 51%, on social media. So, interesting tidbit as well, there's a book called Hooked by Nir Eyal, and he said perhaps more startling, fully 1/3 of Americans say they would rather give up sex than lose their cell phones. So this is an interesting article that was written by a doctor named Dr. Jean Twenge. She's a professor of psychology at San Diego State University, and she's authored over 130 peer-reviewed papers and 6 books, including her latest, which is iGen, Why Today's Super Connected Kids Are Growing Up Less Rebellious, More Tolerant, Less Happy, and Completely Unprepared for Adulthood, and what that means for the rest of us. It's a mouthful of a title. So the premise of the article is she noticed that since 2012, we've seen a dramatic change in the well-being and mental health of our teenagers. And she said it in the article, what happened in 2012 to cause such a dramatic shift in behavior? It was exactly that moment when the proportion of Americans who owned a smartphone surpassed 50%. Again, it was the moment in time when the proportion of Americans that owned a smartphone surpassed 50%. Next, we'll take a look at the deeper look at the correlations that were drawn, and also why we need to take this information with a grain of salt. So first of all, where do we get this data from? It comes from the Monitoring the Future survey, which is a survey funded by the National Institute on Drug Abuse, and it's designed to be nationally representative. It asks 12th graders more than 1,000 questions every year since the year 1975. It's also queried 8th to 10th graders starting in the year 1991. And the survey asks teens how happy they are, and also how much of their leisure time they spend on various activities, including non-screen activities such as in-person social interactions and exercise. And in recent years, given the rise of the use of smartphones, questions have also been added that include screen activities such as social media, texting, and browsing the web. So Dr. Jean Twenge adds, I call them iGen. They're born between 1995 and 2012. Members of this generation are growing up with smartphones. They have an Instagram account before they start high school, and they do not remember a time before the internet. She draws some pretty bold conclusions, as I have on the slide here. Rates of teen depression and suicide have skyrocketed since 2011. It's not an exaggeration to describe iGen as being on the brink of the worst mental health crisis in decades. Much of this deterioration can be traced to their phones. So digging deeper, 8th graders who spend 10 or more hours a week on social media are 56% more likely to say they're unhappy than those who devote less time on social media. But those who spend 6 to 9 hours a week still report 47% more likelihood to say that they're also unhappy. The opposite is true in in-person interactions, meaning those who spend an above average amount of time with their friends in person are 20% less likely to say they're unhappy. 8th graders who are heavy users of social media increase their risk of depression by 20%, while those who play sports, go to religious services, or even do homework more than the average teen cut their risk significantly. Moreover, teens who spend 3 hours a day or more on electronic devices are 35% more likely to have a risk factor for suicide, such as making a suicide plan. Once again, the effect of screen activities is unmistakable. The more time teens spend looking at screens, the more likely they are to report symptoms of depression. Now, the article goes on to provide some staggering additional statistics. And it's saying between 2009 and 2017, the number of high schoolers who contemplated suicide increased by 25%. In the same time period, the number of teens diagnosed with clinical depression grew by 37%. And in fact, death by suicide among teens have also increased as well. The fact of the matter is, as adults begin to notice the trends that are happening, they've begun to worry. It's the phones. So another interesting statistic here, but before I get into the slide here, there's an interesting story, anecdote that happens that in July 2014, a 13-year-old girl in North Texas awoke to the smell of something burning. Her cell phone had actually overheated and melted a hole into her sheets. National news outlets picked up the story, stoking readers' fears that cell phones might spontaneously combust. To me, however, the flaming cell phone wasn't the only surprising aspect of the story. Why, I wondered, would anyone sleep with her phone in her bed? It's not as though we can surf the web while sleeping. And who could sleep deeply inches away from a buzzing phone? The story is indicative of a national trend. As the slide here, the graph here shows, the smartphone is cutting into teen sleep. Many now sleep less than 7 hours most nights. A teen who's getting less than 7 hours a night is significantly sleep deprived. In just 4 years, from 2012 to 2015, 22% more teens failed to get their 7 hours, minimum of 7 hours of sleep. So Jean Twenge, she conducted a study. It was a 2017 study published in the Clinical Psychological Science, the Journal of Clinical Psychological Science. And Twenge and her colleagues found that a troubling correlation across a couple different surveys. Adolescents who spend more time on social media and electronics seem to be at a higher risk for depressive symptoms and suicide-related outcomes. They also found that teens who spend 7+ hours a day were 2 times more likely to be diagnosed with depression. Perhaps part of the reason for this is because people tend to only post their most glamorous images of their best selves. So we all have a skewed image of what other people's lives really look like. So we compare our seemingly ordinary selves with the best version of other people's lives on the internet. There's a couple of the concepts I'd like to quickly touch upon. That's digital dementia and deep work. Digital dementia was an idea that I learned from a gentleman named Jim Quick. And the sad reality is that we've come to a point where we depend on our phones to think for us. And the less we use our brains, the more it atrophies. Just like if we break our arm and you have it in a sling for 6 weeks, what happens? Our muscles also atrophy. Now, how does this apply in a real life? There's a couple examples I can give you. Like, how many of us don't know the phone number of the 5 people that are closest to us that we speak to most often? Most of us struggle to memorize one 7-digit number, right? And when I was a child, before the time of cell phones, I used to know all the phone numbers of all my family members and all my best friends. Another example is the calculator. We've all become dependent upon the calculator app on our phone. I was out to a dinner with 10 friends, and the bill came out. And in order to divide the bill 10 ways, 3 people had to take out their phone to do the simple calculation. Now, my wife gets on my case because I also use my calculator to calculate the simple 15% tip. And I used to do that without my phone before smartphones, but now I automatically reach for my smartphone to do that calculation for me. Even directions. A lot of us don't even know how to get around our city that we've lived in for years because we depend on punching in that address in our GPS. I had a friend who lived just 5 blocks away from me. And I was like, oh, let me give you directions. He's like, no, just give me the address. I'm like, dude, I live a few blocks away from you. Let me just give you the directions. He's like, dude, I don't want to think about it. I just want to enter it in my phone. And that's precisely the problem, right? And then the other concept I want to talk about is deep work. It's a book by a gentleman named Cal Newport. And deep work is defined as professional activity performed in a state of distraction-free concentration that pushes your cognitive capabilities to their limit. It creates new value, improves your skill, and is hard to replicate. So the ability to perform deep work is becoming increasingly rare because we don't have a distraction-free environment. And because it's becoming more rare, it's also becoming more valuable. He also talks about a concept called attention residue. Suppose I'm working on a high-level task and I'm trying to get deep work, and we'll call that task A. Then I switch to task B, like a low-level task, like checking Facebook or checking my email. Now, attention residue tells us I cannot immediately and effectively switch back to task A because task B continues to occupy some residual mental space and your attention remains divided. They did a study with computer programmers and they found that it took them 22 minutes to get back with undivided attention to task A. Now, can you imagine if it takes us more than 20 minutes to get back to an undivided attention on our high level tasks in our today's society, can we imagine a window in your day where you're not distracted or you don't get a notification or someone doesn't come knock on your door? And this has a lot of implications when it comes to ADD and ADHD, and phones are contributing quite significantly to that. There's one study I actually heard about recently. It was on mice, so we don't know how much it applies to human beings. There's two groups of mice. One group of mice, they set them both up on a maze, and one group of mice, they had blinking lights on two different screens to simulate a multitasking that our modern day employee conditions that our modern day person tries to work under. It took those mice 3 times as long to complete that maze. And what's even scarier is that effect did not reverse even when they stopped the lights. So it seemed to create some permanent damage in slowing their brain function. So I mentioned earlier that, hey, we might need to take this information with a slight grain of salt. So I do want to say the other side of the story here. So there was a study by Orban and Przybylski, and this was published in Nature Human Behavior. And it across the data sets with 355,000 participants, they found only a small, tiny negative correlation between digital technology and well-being. It was so small, in fact, that interestingly, in their analyses, they found that wearing glasses as a child had a stronger negative correlation with well-being. The study also found that the association of well-being with regularly eating potatoes was nearly as negative as the association with technology use. So why am I telling you this? So the purpose of this study, in my eyes, was to demonstrate really how weak the current data is that we have available. And it's easy to draw correlations with a lot of different things. I'll talk about that a little bit more on my next slide. So there are some major caveats with what Dr. Twenge had presented, those troubling statistics that I presented earlier in the presentation. So first is we look at correlation studies, and currently there's no causal data, meaning there's no definitive proof of digital technology altering the minds for the worse. So in order to explain this further, I need to explain the difference between correlation versus causation studies. And to explain that, I'd like to reference a study that was done recently that found a correlation between those who floss their teeth and longevity, meaning those who floss their teeth regularly tended to live longer. Now, the problem with this study is that those who are conscious about flossing their teeth are probably health conscious individuals, meaning they exhibit other behaviors that contribute to long life, such as exercising regularly, eating a healthy diet, not smoking, not drinking excessively, not smoking, and so on and so forth, right? So you can see there's a lot of confounding variables here. Is it the healthy diet or is it the flossing, right? So while you can say that there is a correlation between flossing and long living, you can't necessarily say that flossing causes one to live longer, because there's so many other things that could be causing someone to live longer. Now, there's also a problem with these survey studies that were done. These surveys really weren't designed with the sole intention of studying digital technology use and teen mental health well-being. Instead, they're just general assessments of teen behavior and psychology, like, for example, on drug use and sexual activity and diet. Basically, they found data that might be relevant to technology use, and they extrapolated towards their surveys on technology use and well-being. Now, the second point is that a lot of the studies reported increase in depressive symptoms, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it increased a clinical diagnosis of depression, for example, through a doctor. But what it does mean is that teens agreed with statements like, life often seems meaningless. And we've all taken those surveys with how strongly do you agree with the following statement from 1 to 10? And okay, how strongly do you agree with the statement that life often seems meaningless? So it just means that depressive symptoms is that they agreed with that statement on that particular survey, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they were diagnosable clinically from a doctor with depression. And sometimes questions were asked such as, how many hours a day do you spend on social media? And we can see a lot of problems with that type of question. And the same problem has plagued nutrition research for decades. If I were to ask you, what did you eat yesterday? And I'm asking you to accurately give me an idea of what exactly you ate, what quantities you ate, what ingredients you used. Now, can you imagine how problematic that can be just to recall what I ate yesterday, much less a week ago or a month ago? Now, this is the same problem with media use. We can't accurately depict or predict exactly how much time we've spent on our cell phones. And this is especially the case as activities become more mindless and it becomes even harder to track, to self-report. In fact, a 2016 study found that only about a third of people are able to accurately self-report their technology use. So it's not to say that we can't learn anything from these studies, but they do not provide the definitive evidence that we hope for. Luckily, there is a study coming up, and this is being conducted by Florence Breslin, a scientist with the Laureate Institute for Brain Research, who is currently working on an enormous study called the ABCD study, Adolescent Brain Cognitive Development Study, which is actually funded by the National Institute of Health. The effort is currently tracking almost 12,000 kids for a period of 10 years, starting at the age of 9. The kids are assessed every year on a whole range of developmental and behavioral measures, including physical activity tracking, and every other year they will get a brain scan to track their neurological development. Now, the study will rely on passive data collection rather than surveys. Like from apps like Screen Time and Digital Wellbeing, and they'll also use devices like Fitbits and Apple Watches, which will passively collect data and don't require someone to accurately report their digital usage. So what's unique about this study is that it's actually designed to provide causal relationship versus correlational data that is currently available. Unfortunately, the data for this won't be available for another several years as the study is being conducted. So moving on to the second part is smartphones are designed to be addictive. Now, I really love this part of the presentation. I really like this image. I thought it was pretty funny. All right. So when you look at all these major companies, Google, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, they're really powerful data mining machines. They operate on a massive scale and they can use that to their advantage. And they have powerful A/B testing systems. And I'll explain what that is. So for example, Facebook can slightly tweak the shade of blue on their homepage. They can slightly tweak the font and the layout. And then they can roll that new layout to like 250,000 users and see if it caused their users to spend just a few more seconds on their website. And they're constantly doing this A/B testing and constantly tweaking to make the system even more attractive and even more addicting. That's the power of this data. And as Facebook's current head of marketing bragged in a speech, the average millennial checks his or her phone 157 times a day. That's a total of 145 minutes every day that we're trying to feel connected and validated and liked. Another example is that Netflix changes the preview image of a movie depending on your viewing preferences. So a funny example of that is my wife, she loves Black family comedies. Anything by Tyler Perry, she's watched it on Netflix. But what I've noticed is that we share a profile on Netflix. So what I've noticed is the movies that I want to watch, the preview image used to be like the generic, movie poster, but now it'll have a still of a Black character in the movie, even if that particular character just makes a cameo appearance for just a couple minutes. So why do they do this? Why do they collect all this data? How does collecting all this data hit the bottom line? How can all these companies possibly offer all these services for free? Well, it all makes sense when we realize that we are not the consumer. In fact, we are the product, meaning they want us to use their products for free so they can sell advertising space to their real consumers, which are businesses. Have you ever noticed that there's not a customer service number for the average Google user? They reserve that right only for their real consumer, which are businesses who pay for advertising. So what do they really sell? They sell attention of their users. The more time we spend and the more engaged we are on their platform, the more likely we are to be susceptible to advertisements. The more susceptible we are, the more valuable we are to their advertisers. They also sell information about you. When Google first came out, it was the greatest thing out there. It offered 3 to 4 times the amount of storage space as other mail services provided, right? And it required a bit of an adjustment when you first started using Gmail. You would mention casually in an email to a friend, hey, what was that blender you used to make margaritas last weekend? And then all of a sudden, all the advertisements would change to Blender advertisements in your Gmail, right? And that took a bit of an adjustment. And more interestingly, in the terms of service, in that fine print, you actually give Google the right to listen into your phone calls. Now, why would Google want to listen into our phone calls? So interestingly, I found out recently that Google has an app that they can actually recognize the music in the background of a phone call. Suppose I'm listening to a particular artist that I like in the background of a phone call. Google recognizes that song and tags it to my profile. Now, when that artist comes out with their new album, guess who they're going to target? Of course, me. It extends even further. Think about location. Now Google knows what restaurants we like to visit regularly, that we visit a particular dry cleaners once a week, that we spend 3 hours a week at the gym. And this is all data that they're collecting on an ongoing basis. And this is why random apps ask for strange permissions. I downloaded a calculator app a few months ago, and it asked permission to access my microphone and my contacts. Now, why would a calculator app need access to my microphone and to my contacts? It's so they can collect data on me and sell that data to their advertisers. Lastly, I want to talk about the power of data. Now, this is actually really fascinating. I'd like to share with you an interesting story. Now, lots of people buy lotion, but actually one data analytics company noticed that when women on their baby registry were buying large quantities of unscented lotions around the beginning of their second trimester. Another analyst noted that sometime between the first 20 weeks, pregnant women loaded up on supplements like calcium, magnesium, and zinc. As computers continued to crawl through the data, they were able to identify 25 products that, when analyzed together, allowed them to assign each shopper a pregnancy prediction score. Now, how do they use this score? There was there was a story of a 16-year-old young girl who started to receive baby catalogs from the local Target store. Now, looking at this, noticing this, the father was naturally livid, and he wrote an angry letter to that Target saying, "Why would you be sending baby catalogs to my daughter?" A few days later passed. It turns out that the 16-year-old daughter was in fact pregnant. After which the father wrote a letter to Target apologizing, saying, "It turns out that there are some activities going on in my household that I was not aware of." There have also been cases of companies based on data tracking knowing of a pregnancy before the mother even knew about it. Now, if they're able to make this determination of a major life event based on a handful of purchasing patterns, imagine the power that these technology companies have when they literally collect millions of data points on you every single day. There's a former Facebook employee, Sandy Parakilas, who tried to stop using the service after he left the company in 2012. In his own words, "I literally felt like I was quitting cigarettes. You have a business model designed to engage you and to get you to basically suck as much time out of your life as possible. And then they turn around and sell that attention to advertisers." A short example I'll give you is I posted a recipe a few weeks ago, and that particular recipe happened to abide by the paleo diet guidelines. So I used the hashtag paleo. Guess what advertising started showing up on my Instagram feed? That's right. It was paleo snack bars and paleo workout routines and so on and so forth. So now I'd like to cover how technology is hijacking our minds. So I'd like to talk about the ways in which these companies make us even more addicted to their products. I'll be borrowing some of these ideas from an article that was actually written by How Technology Hijacks Our Psychological Vulnerabilities. This is an article written by Tristan Harris, who is an industry insider who spent several years as a design ethicist with Google's. In the article, he actually outlines 10 ways that technology becomes addictive. I'm going to touch upon 5 of those in today's presentation. So, Every cell phone is basically a slot machine. But unlike slot machines, we have a billion of them around the world and we all carry them in our pockets. So, interesting fact, gamblers plunk $1 billion per day into slot machines in American casinos. And slot machines make more money in the United States than baseball, movies, and theme parks combined. Relative relative to other kinds of gambling, people get addicted to slot machines 3 to 4 times faster. Now, why are slot machines so addictive? Well, the number one psychologically addictive ingredient in slot machines is intermittent variable rewards. So if I were in front of a slot machine, I know that if I keep pulling that lever, I know that eventually I'm going to win. But the problem is I just don't know which pull that's going to be the winning one. So it keeps me in suspense. That excitement, that anticipation, that this idea that this pull could be the one is highly addictive. And addictiveness is maximized when the rate of reward is most variable. Research shows that the level of dopamine, which is known as the happiness and well-being neurotransmitter, surge when the brain is expecting a reward. Apps and websites sprinkle intermittent variable rewards all over their products because it is good for business. Now, how does this manifest in our lives? Have you ever been disappointed to find that you don't have any notifications on your phone? Have you ever cleared your email inbox and then for no reason just refreshed it like 60 seconds later just to make sure that there's not anything new? Are you one of those people who has to get rid of those little red bubbles that I pictured here on this slide? Those are all intermittent variable rewards because there might be something really interesting hiding behind one of those little red bubbles. The next concept I want to touch upon is fear of missing something important. Now, have you ever lost your phone for a few hours and felt like you were completely disconnected from the world? There's one time I went to work and I forgot my phone at home, and the entire 8-hour shift, I was thinking, oh my gosh, there's so many things I'm missing. All these people are calling me. All these people are texting me. I'm missing all these notifications. I come home and I missed absolutely nothing. What is that? It's a fear of missing something important. Now, when I'm trying to do deep work, I generally hide my phone away because I don't want it to distract me. A couple of weeks ago, I was doing my work and about 10 minutes into the process, I heard a ding from my phone. While I was successful at hiding it, I forgot to put it on silent. So then I was like, you know what? It's probably not important. I continued my work. But every couple minutes, I had this nagging notion that, what if it's something important, right? Even though I know there's like a less than 1% chance that it's actually something important, but nonetheless, it continued to nag me until I had to stop my work and look at my phone. And needless to say, it was something completely insignificant that was not worth taking the time to check my phone. So I got so frustrated, I just opened the settings and turned off the notifications on that particular app. So the other mechanism by which technology hijacks our mind is social approval. As Tristan Harris says, we're all vulnerable to social approval. The need to belong, to be approved or appreciated by our peers is among the highest human motivations. But now our social approval is in the hands of tech companies. So let me ask you, have you ever changed your profile picture and checked it every few minutes to see if you got more likes? Now, have you ever been disappointed when you didn't get as many likes as you were hoping for? And more extreme, have you ever taken down a picture and reposted it at a different time in hopes of getting more likes? Leah Perlman, the co-inventor of the Facebook like button, said that she had become hooked on Facebook because she had begun basing her sense of self-worth on the number of likes she was getting. When I need now validation, I go check Facebook. She said, I'm feeling lonely. Let me check my phone. I'm feeling insecure. Let me check my phone. I noticed that I would post something and the like count would be way lower than it used to be. Suddenly, I thought, I'm actually kind of addicted to this feedback. The other concept that technology plays upon is social responsibility. This is the idea that you do me a favor, I'll owe you next time. You say thank you, I have to say you're welcome. Now, you send an email, it's rude not to get back to me in a timely manner. So you follow me, it's rude not to follow you back, right? Especially for teenagers, right? So Snapchat, the app Snapchat has something called a snap streak. This idea that I send a private message to a friend, and the next day they send me a message, and then I send a message back. And every day that you consecutively keep in touch with your friend, it keeps your day streak going. So this is really a stroke of genius. It keeps you coming back to the app at least once a day, playing on the fact that we all want to provide that social reciprocity. But it's like getting milk at the grocery store. They always put that milk in the back of the store because, like, while I'm here, I might as well pick up some chips and some salsa. While I'm in the Snapchat app, I might as well spend another 15 minutes looking at random videos, right? So email, texting, and messaging apps are social reciprocity factories. Companies exploit this vulnerability on purpose. The other example is WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger. Did you notice that recently they added a feature where you can see when others have seen your message? That again plays on social reciprocity, right? Because people know now they have that social pressure that, okay, they saw your message, I better respond. The last method is infinite feeds and autoplay. Now, we consume, plays off the idea that we consume what we're given and not necessarily what we want or need. Cornell professor Brian Wansink demonstrated this when he set up a participant with bottomless bowls that automatically filled without the knowledge of the participant. So he set up a bowl and filled it with soup and connected a hose underneath it that filled up the bowl automatically without the knowledge of the participant. With bottomless bowls, people ate 73% more calories. They also underestimated how much they ate by 140 calories. So tech companies exploit the same principle. News feeds are purposely designed to auto refill with reasons to keep you scrolling and purposely eliminate any reason for you to pause, reconsider, or leave. It's also why video and social media sites like Netflix, YouTube, and Facebook autoplay the next video. A huge portion of traffic on these websites are driven actually by autoplay. Asa Raskin, who invented continuous scroll in 2006, said, behind every screen on your phone, there are literally 1,000 engineers that have worked on this thing to make it maximally addicting. If you don't give your brain time to catch up with your impulses, you just keep scrolling. The innovation kept users looking at their phones far longer than necessary. All right, now getting into the solution. What can we do about this? If you've noticed any of these traits or behaviors in your life, just like I did, then this section is definitely for you. Okay, first step is become aware of the issue. And this is where apps like Screen Time and Digital Wellbeing come in handy. On Screen Time, they have a couple different metrics. One is time and one is pickups, how many times you looked at your phone. So I will tell you that time isn't necessarily the most indicative of how intelligently you're using your phone. So for example, I use a meditation app every morning, so I'm automatically dinged 45 minutes for using my phone for that meditation app. But I would consider that an intelligent use of my phone. Now, what can be useful is looking at how much time you spend on each of the apps on your phone. There's an Instagram video of a young celebrity checking her screen time. And it turns out in the last 7 days, she spent 18 hours on Instagram. And her reaction was just like, what am I doing with my life? And pickups is also an interesting measure. I think it's in fact more important than the amount of time you spent. Based on a podcast interview with Dr. Mark Hyman, he asked his nephew to guess how much time he spent on his phone. And he was like, oh, I don't spend more than a couple hours. There's no way I spend more than a couple hours on my phone per day. It turned out he spent more than 8 hours on his phone and had almost 1,000 pickups per day. 1,000 pickups. Right? How is that even possible, right? So a high pickup number to me signifies that we are checking our phone mindlessly and almost impulsively every time we get bored, like at a stoplight or in a waiting room or whatever it may be, in a conversation with someone else. So the next step, number 2, is notice mindless engagements. The way we do this is to set up speed bumps. And I thought about an example. My wife and I, we went on a cleanse a few years ago, a diet. And one of the tenets of this cleanse was that you weren't allowed to snack in between meals. But what I noticed myself doing was we'd go to a doctor's office or a waiting room, and there's always that bowl of candy. And I would like just automatically reach towards that candy, unwrap it, and put it in my mouth before I realized, wait, I'm not supposed to be happening. Yeah, I'm not supposed to be doing this. I'm not supposed to be snacking between meals. And the scary part about it was that it was almost automatic. It was impulsive. Like wasn't thinking about it. It just happened automatically. And this is the problem with our cell phone as well. Just automatically, we're just reaching for our phones for no reason, right? And one of the ways to get around this is to put a rubber band around your device. And you start noticing some trends. And this sets up a speed bump. It just takes a second to take off that rubber band, but it causes you to slow down and think. And then it takes another second to put it back on before you put your phone away. And you'll start noticing some pretty funny trends. There's one article that said that he did this exercise and he noticed that every time he inserted his credit card into that credit card reader at a store, every time that happened, it takes a few seconds for that transaction to approve. In that time, he would pull out his phone and check his notifications. And he didn't even realize he was doing this until he put a rubber band around his phone. So set up a small speed bump so that you think before you actually act. The other step number 3 is something I came up with. It's PPPP, or P4 for short. It stands for phones poison productivity without purpose. Again, phones poison productivity without purpose. So I'm not anti-technology. I'm just about using your phone with purpose. So there's really 2 sides to this. First is when you pick up your phone impulsively, you see PPPP and you can set it as your desk or your lock screen. And you can ask yourself the question, do I really need to be using my phone right now? Do I really have a reason to be using my phone? And more often than not, you'll probably answer that question, no. So the second side of it is that when you actually do need to use your phone, are you using your phone effectively and with a purpose? So for example, if I know, okay, I really need to send a text to my friend, he's waiting for a text, I really need to do that. What happens for us is we pick up our phone, we unlock it, and then we get distracted by another notification and we go on Facebook and scroll on Facebook for 10 minutes. Then we lock our phone and put it down. And then we realize, wait, didn't I have to use my phone for something? I meant to do something. And we didn't even do the task that we were originally set out to do. So again, PPPP, the phone poisons productivity without purpose, helps you on both of those fronts. And that leads into the next point, which number 4, which batch tasks involving your phone. So one of the things that I found really effective to improve my productivity and to decrease distractions of my phone is that I make a list. Every time you think of something that you need to do on your phone, add it to a list on pen and paper, right? And when that list gets about 4 or 5 deep, then you can actually execute those things with a purpose without getting distracted by other notifications. Next is, of course, go on a digital detox. As with most addictions, you don't really know how dependent you are on something until you try to stop using it. So this could be 1 day a week. I'm not going to use my phone. Maybe 1 day a month, or perhaps just a couple hours a day. Like after 8 p.m., I will not use my cell phone. Next simple thing you can do is turn off all notifications. This goes back to that idea that I had earlier of fear of missing out. Even if it's something not important, as soon as I get a ding notification, I feel a need to check my phone. And every time that happens, I'm getting interrupted in my deep work. So this really takes away your phone's ability to dictate your actions. And people always say, but what if I miss something important? Or what if an emergency happens? Well, tell your friends, your family, and your coworkers that if it's an emergency, just call me. Just call me because I don't respond to text right away. And of course, we all know there's maybe 0.1% of the time is it actually something important when we get a notification. Next tip is to turn your phone on grayscale. This is another method to set up a speed bump. So actually a common diet technique is to avoid eating highly palatable foods and only eating bland foods. Now, why would you do that? It's because you're more likely not to overconsume food when it's bland, right? When it doesn't taste so great, you'll just eat what you need and not eat more than what you need. If your bed is not that comfortable, then you're less likely to sleep more than you need to, right? So we're less likely to consume something when it's highly palatable. And same thing with our phones. With all the colors and notifications that are constantly going on, it's highly palatable. But when you make it on grayscale, it makes it less interesting. So you're forced and more inclined to just use it for what's intended purposes. The next is give your phone the Marie Kondo treatment. Marie Kondo, she advocates only keeping items that in your house that bring you joy and meaning and purpose into your life. Well, the same thing goes for our apps. How many apps do we have on our phone that we haven't used in months or years? Instead, they just clutter up our phone. Go through your phone and give it the Marie Kondo treatment. Get rid of all those apps that don't provide you joy or meaning or purpose in your life. And the last thing, tip is do not sleep with your phone. A study was done recently that the mere presence of a phone lit up the brain. And it didn't even have to be the participant's phone. It could have been the researcher's phone. The researcher would put their phone on a table next to the brain scanning machine, and the person's brain would just light up. So when we're putting our phone on the nightstand next to us, our brain subconsciously is active and doesn't allow us to get into that rest mode that we need for proper sleep. Another study draw a correlation between quality of sleep and the distance the phone was kept from the bed. So if you keep your phone in another room or in the bathroom far away, you're more likely to get better sleep, as opposed to if you keep your phone on your nightstand, or even worse, in your own bed. Deloitte did a survey that they found that 1 in 3 people admit to checking their smartphone in the middle of the night. So all these nine techniques are simple things that you can do to just be aware of the issues and to help you use your phone with purpose. So we're reaching the end of the presentation. I provide all my references here. If you'd like it, just reach out to me. I'd be glad to provide these references. Now, in closing, before we get to any questions, if there are any, that I want to reiterate that I'm not anti-technology. Technology has literally changed the world. It allows us to connect and connect with people across the globe. I have family members that I haven't talked to in years, but I can talk to them on a regular basis because of different technologies. And it's also enabled so many industries and employed millions of people across the globe. So again, I'm not anti-technology. I'm just trying to encourage the intelligent use of technology to enrich our lives rather than subtract from it. The point is to become the master of our phones instead of becoming the slave to our phones, as this funny comic demonstrates. Great. So at this point in time, I will open up to any questions. Just let me know if you have any. Those on Facebook Live, sorry, but maybe you can ask questions on Facebook Live if you have any. Let me see if there's anything in the chat box. Okay, there's not any questions. I'll give it a couple minutes, and if no one has any questions, we'll just end it early. Give a shout out to my mother-in-law, Alka Khanna, Ambika Cheravu, Raj Cheravu, and Lokesh for coming live on the webinar. We also have Gaithan on Facebook Live and Sonal Shah. Vikram is watching. Chris Myers is watching. Romil is watching. Swarna, Quentin Broussard, Siddharth Shiva, Deepthi. Shout out to Pranav, Ron Eagleton, and Jigar Patel. All right, thank you for watching, guys. Man, I wish you guys were on the Zoom, because then you could have seen the slides, but that's okay. I'm happy you're here. All right, we'll give it one more minute. And okay, do cell phones cause tumors? This is an area, this is a great question. Frankly, I'm not really very familiar with the research, but what I do know is that it's really early. We don't have definitive evidence that show that causal relationship between using your cell phone and tumors. There is some evidence to suggest that all the electromagnetic waves that's caused from charging our phones and the electrical wires and all the Wi-Fi signals and the cell phone signals passing through our brains when we're trying to sleep, it disturbs our sleep and increases our risk for cancers and so on. But again, a lot of the studies that are available right now are all correlational, and not causational. So we don't know for sure. And also, do they mess up our hormone system? Same thing. Same thing, but I don't know of any research specifically that shows with cell phones and hormones. I wouldn't doubt it, though. I wouldn't doubt it that it has some effect on our hormones, especially even when it alters our sleep. We know that when we don't sleep well, it increases our hormone levels, and it also increases our hunger craving hormones. So the example I heard recently was that, you know, when you're up at 2 in the morning and you have that craving to eat something, in that moment, you never think, you know, I'm really craving a salad, do you? You think you just want to go at 2 in the morning, that midnight snack, you want to eat some junk food, right? Some greasy, refined carbohydrates and sugar, right? So what's happening is our hormones are being imbalanced because we're not sleeping properly. Great question. We got a comment. Thank you. Very informative. I learned a lot. Well, I'm glad you learned a lot. Okay. Well, great. Well, we'll end it here. You feel free to reach out to me. Please subscribe to my newsletter. I send out weekly newsletters with a lot of great health and wellness tips. You can subscribe to my website, www.drram.co. Also, I also have a WhatsApp broadcast. So shoot me a message on WhatsApp, and I send out daily health and wellness tips. A lot of people love that because you can respond to me and ask me questions on that. I also do that on Instagram. I send those same daily health and wellness tips on Instagram as well. If you're interested in joining my WhatsApp broadcast, my phone number for WhatsApp is 469-616-4333. Again, that's 469-616-4333. You can add me on WhatsApp and shoot me a message, and I'll add you to that broadcast. All right, guys. We do have a question here. Are there apps that limit the amount of time we use the phone? Yeah, so even screen time, there's parental controls you can actually set up on that. It's mainly meant for like parents with their kids, that you can actually set a guideline of how much time they can spend on particular apps. For example, if I have a child that I want to say, okay, you can only spend 30 or 45 minutes on a particular app, you can set that parameter in this using screen time. So that's a very useful resource. I'm sure you can set up the same thing for yourself. I encourage everyone to just open their phones right now and just take a look at their screen time. If you have an iPhone with the latest iOS, which is iOS 12, you can look at your screen time. I did a really funny video. Look at my YouTube channel. I did a really funny video where I asked people in the mall, in the park, at different stores, how much time do you guess you spend on your cell phone? And all of them guessed like 2 hours. And they looked at their phone, they spent 8 hours. It was just a really funny video. And it's actually my most popular video on YouTube. One more question. I'm sure that cell phones would affect younger children even faster. Yes, I'm actually glad you brought this up. This gentleman named Simon Sinek, and he has videos on YouTube, and he's saying that dopamine that I talked about, that intensive addictive dopamine. As adults, it has less effect on us because our brains are more developed and we're more resilient to these types of addictive behaviors. But imagine children. They're children their brains are still developing. They can't handle that level of dopamine. This dopamine just completely messes their system up, and it causes them to use their phone even more, and it causes them to become even more addictive. And perhaps that's why we have these correlational studies that show that our rates of depression increase when we use, especially teens, when they use their cell phones more often. So they are definitely more susceptible. Yeah, and the brain barrier is also very delicate. Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay, guys. Well, I think I will close it up there. Again, reach out to me on my various platforms. Oh, man, I forgot that. I forgot to put that slide up. Here, let's see if I can just put that up quickly. Okay, well, here's all the information that I talked about earlier. I'm on Facebook, I'm on Twitter, my location is here, Instagram handle, YouTube channel, LinkedIn, my email address is listed there, and also my phone number if you want to be added to my broadcast list. Well, I hope you guys found this helpful. I definitely enjoyed it. I'm glad so many people logged on Facebook Live and also on the Zoom webinar. All right, guys, have a good night. I'll see you guys next time on my next webinar.